Kia ora koutou. Welcome everybody to this webinar for the Trade Waste Bylaw Review. My name is Claire Fletcher. I will be your host today. We are just going to wait 1 or 2 more minutes as there are a few more registered that have shown up on the call thus far. Kia ora koutou everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I can see that everybody that registered has now joined the call. For those that popped in late, my name is Claire Fletcher. I'm your host today for this webinar on the Trade Waste Bylaw Review. A bit of an agenda from me first. I'll introduce you to the team behind the screen and let you know how you can participate during the session. Then I'll hand over to our presenters who'll run you through an overview of the Trade Waste Bylaw and the proposals. We'll then have time for questions and share next steps. So today you'll be hearing from Jenna Marsden, who'll give you a wave, Gary Cohen, and Andrew Batchelor as subject matter experts. We also have Olivia Taylor in the background. You won't be able to see her, but she's working hard behind the scenes to keep this session flowing smoothly for us. Now, how to participate. Your mics and your cameras have been switched off so that we can keep the session moving, but you can ask questions using the Q&A function, which is located at the top bar menu as a speech bubble. You'll see it there above at the top of your screen, Q&A with a speech bubble. You can click in there and type your questions in and the team can see them. We'll answer questions at the end of the session because some of them may be answered through the presentation themselves. If you aren't able to use that Q&A function or not comfortable using it, you can also email your questions to us using letstalk. Can I just get a sound check? Perfect. So reiterating that, if you're unable to use the Teams chat, Teams Q&A function, you can use letstalk.ccc.govt.nz to send your questions through as well, and we'll be watching that as well. If you are a little hard of hearing or experiencing technical issues, sound issues, such as myself just then, you can turn on live captions. Just click on the 3 small dots that are at the top of your screen above More, and then click on Turn on Live Captions near the bottom of the drop-down list. This will then provide you with a script at the bottom of what's said. And one last thing from me, hopefully the banner came up when you joined to let you know that the session is being recorded. The recording will be shared on our YouTube channel in the next few days, and you'll receive a link to review it via email, which will also include a copy of the PowerPoint slides that we used today. I'm now going to hand over to Jenna, who's going to start the presentation for us.
Great, thanks, Claire. Kia ora koutou. I'm going to start by giving you a little bit of context about bylaws and about this bylaw in particular, because I appreciate that some of you might be really familiar with the bylaw and what it does, but for others it may be completely new territory. So trade wastes are discharges to the wastewater network from activities undertaken at businesses and industrial premises, which need to be managed due to the volume and content. So it could be things like fats and greases, chemicals contained in that discharge. But a trade waste consent is required for these type of discharges. Really important to note that trade waste does not include standard wastewater from toilets or bathrooms. The Council has powers to make bylaws to regulate trade waste and also to protect public health under the Local Government Act 2002. Bylaws are local laws and are regulatory tools which either require actions of others or prohibit certain actions. And they also allow council to take enforcement action if someone is failing to comply with a bylaw. We already have a trade waste bylaw in place, and that is the Trade Waste Bylaw 2015. You can find this on our website. So our trade waste bylaw places controls on trade waste discharges in order to protect the public wastewater system, but also the stormwater network, public health and the environment. The bylaw sets the framework for trade waste consents and it provides the basis for charging and monitoring. Next slide, please. Yep, thank you. So the council has legislative requirements it must comply with regarding bylaws, including when and how we review our bylaws. So this particular bylaw, we are required to review it before the end of November 2025. And the process we use to review it is also largely set by the legislation. It includes consultation with consent holders, the community, and also the Minister of Health. So typically this process, we can break it into 3 phases. The first is largely internal. It's where we identify any issues, assess how the current bylaw is working, and whether there are any emerging issues or changes in regulation that we need to consider reflecting in our bylaw. And as a result of that process, we put together a draft bylaw. And we move on to the external phase of the process, which is where council makes a decision to adopt that draft bylaw and then consult on the draft. So we test our draft bylaw with stakeholders in the community and invite feedback on it. This does involve a hearings and deliberations process where submitters can choose to come in and speak to their submission in front of a hearings panel, or also just put in a written submission. And that hearings panel then deliberates on all submissions, recommending any changes to the draft bylaw to council. So the product from that is a final form of bylaw which will be recommended to council. And then the third stage is implementations, where the council will make that final decision to adopt the final bylaw and bring it into force. So we're currently in that external phase. We've got that wee red arrow. So we're consulting on the proposed amendments to the current bylaw, and the remaining part of the process will take around about 6 months. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the timeframes and next steps later on after covering off proposed amendments to the bylaw. And the final bit of context I wanted to cover, I just want to talk a little bit about our trade waste discharges in Christchurch and Banks Peninsula. So our district has just under 1,600 trade waste consents in total. And how discharges are categorised is largely based on the volume of the discharge and Schedule 1A of the bylaw. So Schedule 1A is a list of permitted characteristics of the discharge. So this includes things like the flow, the temperature, and the amounts of different kinds of chemicals, things like that. So a large majority of our trade waste consents are permitted trade waste consents. Now this category still are required to get a trade waste consent, but permitted in this context means that they meet the discharge characteristics outlined in Schedule 1A of the bylaw. And they also typically have a total volume of less than 1,245 metres cube per year. So some examples in this category are things like hairdressers, restaurants, takeaways, and wash pads. We then have conditional trade waste consents, and this is split into annual and quarterly. Conditional annual consents have the same volume limit as permitted consents, but they don't meet the characteristics in Schedule 1A. So for example, the discharge may contain a high level of a particular metal, as an example. So we have just over 120 of these types of consents. Then we have our conditional quarterly consents. So these discharges are higher volume, and they do not meet those discharge characteristics contained in Schedule 1A. For these ones, Council assesses the discharge by volume and contaminants quarterly, and we charge according to that. And we have around 180 consents in this category. So some examples that fall in here are things like hospitals and large food processing facilities. We also have 50 tankered waste consents, which allow trade waste which has been transported away from the originating site to be disposed of at the trade waste reception facility at our wastewater treatment plant. So consent holders are spread right across the district with a particular concentration in the central city due to the large number of hospitality premises with the permitted trade waste consents. We also have concentrations in parts of the city with large industrial areas, so you see higher numbers in places like Hornby, for example. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the internal phase of the bylaw review has been completed, and overall we found the bylaw is largely still fit for purpose, but Council has also identified some emerging issues or gaps where changes to the bylaw could be helpful to improve regulation of trade waste. I'm now going to hand over to Gary, who'll cover some of the key changes.
Thanks, Jenna. Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to see some familiar names. The draft bylaw proposes stricter limits on some discharge contaminants. First up is inorganic mineral solids or sand, silts and clays. A bit of background for this one. There's been recent stricter limits placed on stormwater discharges. This has put an increased reliance on the wastewater network to remove construction phase wastewater. This wastewater is high in mineral solids, which is very problematic for our wastewater network because they don't naturally break down and they rely on high enough velocity within the pipes to keep the solids from moving along. These solids need to be ultimately removed from our network at the pump stations and at the Christchurch wastewater treatment plant. The current permitted limit for total suspended solids is 600 grams per cube. This current limit will remain, but for discharges containing only the inorganic mineral solids, the sand, silts, clays, we propose reducing the TSS limit down to 100 grams per cube. This will affect activities such as dewatering, hydro excavation, stone cutting, and concrete production. This proposal aligns with the TSS limit for dewatering to the stormwater network, which can range anywhere between 50 to 80 milligrams per litre, depending on the stormwater body you're discharging into. So we expect our trade waste consent holders will already be familiar with the pre-treatment requirements to be able to treat down to this new compliant level. The industry standard of passive interceptors and in some cases flocculant would be sufficient to be able to treat down to this new level. And we are also proposing to prohibit persistent organic pollutants. This is umbrella category, including DDT, PCBs and PFAs. All of these pollutants are man-made toxic chemicals that are resistant to degradation and can have negative effects on the environment and on humans. Our bylaw, there'll be specific mention of PFAs or PFAS. These forever chemicals have widespread use in surfactants, waterproof and stain-proof coating, non-stick pans, cosmetics and firefighting foams. Over the last decade, there has been emerging environmental and health concerns about these substances due to their durability, ability to bioaccumulate, and links to cancer. Wastewater treatment plants like our own are generally unaffected at treating and removal of these chemicals, which ultimately means that they are discharged unchanged into the receiving environment, or for Christchurch would be the ocean outfall. Following EPA guidance, the Council wants to address any intentional discharges obtaining these compounds. This proposal is one way we can help prevent further discharge of these chemicals going into our natural environment. This change is not intended to address any small amounts that may be inadvertently discharged for the use of household products. Although these contaminants are prohibited under a permitted consent, there will still remain the option to discharge PFAS or any other prohibited waste. This is only allowed if the council is satisfied that the discharge is safe for the wastewater network, and such cases will be managed with a conditional trade waste consent. This will still allow for the avenue for cleanup of the old contaminant wastewater in storage across the country, that's waiting for treatment. To remove PFAS from wastewater, there's specialised pre-treatment required, and you still have the issue of dealing with the spent contaminated filters in the end. This risk involved is too high for permitted consent, resulting in our decision to prohibit them. So that's me. On to Andrew.
Hi there, thanks Gary. We're proposing some changes to the bylaw to clarify the requirement for trade waste consent when the discharge from dewatering is going to the wastewater network rather than the stormwater network. Gary's touched on a little bit of that around organic mineral solids. Approval is required for discharges associated with dewatering activities in some form. In most cases, dewatering discharges are made to the stormwater network, but in limited circumstances, some can't be accepted to the stormwater network, instead are considered for discharge to the wastewater network as trade waste. Our water supply and wastewater bylaw requires approval to discharge the wastewater network, but the trade waste bylaw is not clear on the requirement for a trade waste consent in these instances. The proposed changes to the trade waste bylaw more clearly set this out. Operationally, we aren't making a change because this is how we've been handling them based on the requirements of the wastewater bylaw. And as Gary was talking about around inorganic solids, mineral solids. The next thing we'll talk about is tankered waste, and that is wastewater or trade waste that is transported away from the originating site by vehicle for disposal at an approved point, rather than being discharged directly from a premises through wastewater pipes. Trade Waste Reception Facility, or TWIF, as some of you will be familiar with, is at the Christchurch treatment plant. It became operational in 2016 after the bylaw was last reviewed. As a result, the tankered waste provisions of the bylaw have been looked at to see what could be improved to best reflect best practice and operational changes. We're proposing a number of changes to improve the regulation of tankered waste discharges, ensure our new facility is appropriately protected, that treatment processes are not disrupted, and to ensure that workers are kept safe. These changes include requiring as a possible condition of its consent that records are kept of any tankered waste deliveries accepted, specifying the types of waste that can be accepted and that we may refuse certain types of discharges, requiring necessary connections are provided by the consent holder or discharger, requiring that CWTP conditions of entry, e.g. wearing personal protective equipment, are adhered to, and providing for the recovery of costs for any damages. I'll now hand back to Jenna to cover the last of the proposed changes.
Great, thanks Andrew. So on to the more administrative changes that we're proposing. We are proposing to introduce a term for permitted consents of up to 10 years. So currently permitted consents are granted indefinitely with no expiry date. Although this particular category of consent is typically lower risk, the perpetual nature of the consent is not beneficial for ensuring that the consent remains appropriate over time. Providing a maximum term on permitted trade waste consents will ensure that they're periodically reviewed. And this is going to help confirm that the appropriate conditions are in place for the type of the discharge and that conditions are being met. And this will benefit both the public network in terms of ensuring protection, and it will also help reduce risk of damage or blockages to the consent holder's private drains. We are also proposing some changes to consent decision-making processes to make sure the bylaw is being used to regulate the right things, that Council is considering all relevant matters on each application, and that Council has the ability to refuse an application where necessary. So the draft bylaw sets out wider matters that we may consider when making a decision on consent applications. So the criteria trade waste consent applications are considered against is set out in the current bylaw, but this is largely focused on biophysical considerations. So there are other considerations which might be relevant, such as compliance with legislation or regulations, or social and cultural factors. So in particular, any decision made by council, which includes any approval or consent decision made under the bylaw, must also comply with the decision-making requirements of the Local Government Act. In some circumstances, this could include seeking advice and views from mana whenua to inform the council's decision on an application if it's identified that the proposed discharge may have potential cultural impacts. So it's proposed to include reference to these potential considerations to clarify for the applicant or any other person reading the bylaw that these matters may be considered. We're also proposing to remove the application processing times from the bylaw and communicate these processing targets in other ways, including on our website and on the application forms or advice directly from officers. And the reason for this is that processing times is not a matter that the council should be regulating with the bylaw. And this change will align with the approach with all our other bylaws for water services. So for example, connections to any of our water service networks or our industrial stormwater discharge licence applications. And finally for this slide, the bylaw also lacks detail on the reasons why we may decline a trade waste consent. So for clarity and certainty, we're proposing a new bylaw clause to set this out. Reasons include, among others, because I'm surely going to miss some, are that we may decline if the proposed discharge may cause overflows, if there's insufficient capacity in the network, if the discharge may compromise council's service or obligations, or if refusal is necessary to protect taonga or ensure tikanga processes are observed, or for any other matter related to the consideration criteria set out in the bylaw, which also cannot be addressed or managed. Okay, thank you. So in addition to the key changes that Gary, Andrew and myself have outlined, we also propose some minor amendments, including changing some wording to improve clarity without otherwise affecting the intent of the bylaw, updating outdated terms and references, particularly to legislation and other documents, updating definitions to improve clarity and consistency. There are some new definitions that have been added to aid understanding or to support enforcement, while terms that are no longer relevant to the bylaw have been removed. And we've also put the bylaw onto our new standard format for bylaws. I'll now hand back to you, Claire.
Thank you, Jenna. So this brings us to the end of our presentation of what we're proposing to change within the bylaw, and we have now time for questions. We note that we haven't got any questions in the Q&A, so what we're going to do is if you have a question that you'd like to ask of the team, we're going to stop sharing the presentation, and then you'll see at the top of your screen there's a little hand that says raise. So if you have a question that you would like to ask, please raise your hand and Olivia will ensure that you're able to speak. Okay, we don't have any questions. Team, was there anything that you would like to ask of the participants online? Oh, we have one question that's just come in. So Olivia, if you would like to unmute them for us. And feel free to ask your question. Sorry, team, we're just ensuring that that can be done. So, okay, the questions come in through the Q&A, so I will share it with everyone. Are there any changes to obligations for compliance, or who is ultimately responsible, the tenant or the landlord? Who would like to take that? One of our team?
I can take it. So are there any changes to obligations to comply, or who is ultimately responsible, tenant or the landlord? Currently, there's no changes to this, I believe. There's a follow-up question of kind of who maintains grease traps. Whoever's maintaining the grease trap is ultimately responsible and needs to be on the trade waste consent.
Thanks, Gary. Then another question that has come through is there a testing capability for the treatment plant laboratory to test PFAS and other similar substances?
I can take this one again. So our laboratory down at the wastewater treatment plant can't test for PFAS, but Hill's laboratory does offer that service.
Thanks, Gary. And a follow-up question from the first one around changes and obligations to comply and who's responsible. Could you please quickly also run through the direct increase in costs to tenants, business and building owners that you expect to arise from these changes, if any?
I can grab that one. Generally, this won't is no major changes to the expectations. This is currently in the bylaw with regard to a consent being required. So there shouldn't be any sort of direct increase in costs or anything like that rising from these changes. It's just noting the making it clear that that's how it works. It's a bit of wording change to make sure it's actually really appropriately written.
Thanks, Andrew. Again, if you've got any questions, please do put them in the Q&A or raise your hand and let us know. Olivia will unmute you so that you can share with us your questions. I'm just going to do a quick check with my colleague. Any more? No, no more have come in through the Q&A. So what I will do is share my screen again. If you do have any, oh, we've got one more hand up, Kevin Buse. Olivia, can you unmute Kevin?
Right, I'm here. Yeah, sorry. I was just wanting to ask, we're from Bylaw.nz. Just wanting to clarify how we're going to control prohibited substances and how we're going to issue limits for prohibited substances in a consent, and why that's prohibited rather than a controlled substance. This is causing us some confusion. Does that make sense?
Yep, it does.
Okay.
I can take that. So the site will be able to apply for discharge prohibited substances in a controlled manner. Once the site has proved compliance with this, it can be added to a special condition on the discharge consent. This will be a quarterly consent. The Schedule 1 on our bylaw, which sets out all the contaminant limits, that's our that's our permitted consent limits. So what we expect most sites to be able to do. Yeah, does that answer the question?
Well, we're a bit puzzled by this. To be honest, I was expecting some other people from the company to be wading in, but here I am. And yeah, I'm the environmental advisor, cover chem waste down in Woolston. And Oh, what's happening?
Keep going. Keep going.
Oh, sorry,
We can
there's a
hear
voice
you.
in the background. Yes, yeah, so we're just trying to establish how this is going to be consented going forward. You know, I hear what you're saying, but prohibited is usually means that we can't discharge it at all. And to set a limit on a prohibited substance seems to be a bit contradictory. That's our initial stance. I mean, that's what we're talking about between ourselves. And I was just asking for maybe a reconsideration whether that should be a prohibited substance on a casual basis at the moment. Yeah, we feel that that's a little bit of a tough ask in the modern world with
Probably
the
with.
go on.
Sorry, Kevin. If you mind, it's probably worth noting that the prohibited schedule pretty much just lists prohibited substances.
Yeah,
so
well, I'm familiar
there's
with that.
so there's no specific limits as such. A higher bar would be required, and it would be specific to the actual substances if there was any allowance. That's probably the best way to describe it. Generally prohibited substances, it remains prohibited. I think Gary's aware there's one or two sites around the city where pre-treatment is required anyway, and none of the actual prohibited goes into the network. But it's more just capturing that aspect of it, I think, is probably the best way to describe it.
We fully recognise the validity of controlling these substances. Don't worry about that. But to call it prohibited, I mean, I'm probably repeating myself, seems to be the wrong term. And a strictly controlled substance would probably be a better description of it. Because you can't really give a limit for a prohibited substance in other areas of legislation, you know.
Yeah, that's probably a fair.
Yeah, so we're just throwing that up in the air and seeing if you want to have a look at that. And obviously we'll be talking about it after this webinar.
Absolutely, thanks, Kevin.
Nobody else seems to be wading in, so I'm here on my own. It looks like it's okay. I'm used to
it. There is a clause on the trade waste bylaw that will remain, and it states that a site can discharge prohibited substances under a quarterly conditional consent with certain conditions placed on the consent individual for the site. So I understand that you're worried that it's prohibited, but there's ways around.
Okay, well, we didn't pick that. I mean, there's a fair bit in the bylaw that you put out. We didn't. We've had a look at it. I have to admit, I only read it this morning, but we've had various people look at it, and nobody had picked up on that get out clause, as it were. Maybe that needs to be enhanced in some way. So that we're aware of it. Put it that way.
I appreciate the feedback, Kevin. We'll keep that in mind.
Yeah, I mean, it's costing us some concern. We're as you know what we're doing down at Chem Waste. We're trying to help the world, and but we look at this puts a spanner in the works. Right. Yeah. I better not say anything more. Oh, you're off mic. Sorry. I'll close down now.
Sorry, just to add to that, would it be useful perhaps if we get in touch with Kevin afterwards just with those specific clauses so they can have a closer look at them?
Are there anybody else out there that has a question for us? Okay, what I'll do is I'll share our screen again and just run through the last slides to give you some more key dates. Okay. Thanks for your questions there, Kevin, and the others that asked them in the Q&A. It was great to have some things to be able to answer for you in consideration of your submissions later in the month or early next month. If some of you aren't having a holiday, I hope you are. To let you know, you can have your say until Sunday, the 12th of January. There are several ways you can provide your feedback. You can do it directly online at letstalk.ccc.govt.nz/trade-waste. You can also email it to the team at letstalk@ccc.govt.nz. But if you do, please do include your feedback in the format that the questions are online, including whether or not you would like to speak to a hearings panel should we need one when the bylaw is reviewed, goes to the hearings panel for consideration. You can also call me on 941 5311 if you have any other questions or considerations for your submission. Next steps. So what we have happening is consultation will close on Sunday, the 12th of January. Hearings and considerations of submissions will happen through March 2025. We expect that the hearings panel would prepare a report and recommendations to Council in April to May, and then the Council would adopt a final bylaw by the end of July next year. That bylaw would then take effect on the date set out by the Council in the Council decision whether or not to adopt the recommendations from the hearings panel. This brings us to the end of our presentation. Thank you for everyone who's joined today. There are a lot of you that joined today and we really appreciate it. If you have any feedback about the session itself, please do contact me or the engagement team. If you have any more questions, you can also contact us, and for both of those reasons, just email letstalk@ccc.govt.nz. We will also be in touch with you over the coming days with answers to the questions, so you've got a copy in writing and links to rewatch the session recording if you would like. Thank you again from myself and the team. Thank you for bearing with my technical issues throughout. Tēnā koutou katoa.